Northern Ireland, a fairly widespread frost to start the weekend, but should be some cracking sunshine here on Saturday. Now, yesterday we thought this rain may be a little further north, but now it looks like it will be mostly across these eastern parts of England, south of Lincolnshire into the East Midlands. A dull, damp day here on Saturday. Brighter skies for Wales and southwest England, some sunshine likely here, and as I said, a fine day for Scotland and Northern Ireland after that early frost. Temperatures picking up to 8 or 9 degrees, but it's quite a bit colder than that, stuck under that thick cloud, rain and drizzle, which will persist across these eastern parts of England. And easterly winds starting to pick up as well. That will eventually start to chase the rain away during Saturday night and into Sunday. Just a few showers on Sunday, but many places dry, with a fair bit of cloud across England and Wales and a cold easterly wind blowing too.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott. Today we'll be getting the latest on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, an exclusive interview with former Cabinet Minister Rory Stewart, and we'll discuss the tactics of modern warfare. But first, it's the news with Rhiannon Jones. It's 12 o'clock, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Vladimir Putin has warned those opposing Russia's actions in Ukraine not to exacerbate the situation. That as Boris Johnson calls Moscow's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine a direct threat to the safety of all Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, the largest in Europe, caught fire after it was attacked by Russian forces overnight. The blaze has since been put out, but Downing Street has called the situation gravely concerning. Boris Johnson's vowed to seek an emergency UN Security Council meeting in a bid for a ceasefire. Earlier, Ukrainian authorities confirmed Russia has now taken control of the power plant. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the Russian people to take action against their government.
Russian people, I want to appeal to you. How is this possible? After all, we fought together in 1986 against the consequences of the Chernobyl catastrophe. How could you ever forget about it? If you did not forget, then you must not keep silent. You must tell your authorities. Go out on the streets and say that you want to live on the land without radioactive contamination. Radiation does not know where Russia is.
Volodymyr Zelensky there, speaking at the organization's headquarters in Vienna. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, confirmed there were no radiation leaks.
important to say that all the safety systems of the 6 reactors at the plant were not affected at all, and that there has been no release of radioactive material. The systems we have to measure the radiation are fully functional as well.
The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine. That, as an intensive day of diplomacy begins in Europe. Liz Truss is attending a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. Well, this morning, Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko said his forces will not take part in Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO's a defensive alliance and warns it won't hesitate to defend its borders.
Russia has shattered peace on the European continent. It has engaged in a war of a scale, of a type not seen in Europe since the Second World War.
Earlier, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said Vladimir Putin's at risk of ending up in prison for alleged war crimes carried out by his Russian forces in Ukraine. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says anyone who's committed offences must be brought to justice.
From what I've already seen, it seems to me there's evidence of war crimes, and it's very important that all of those responsible are held to account, including Putin. I'm very pleased that the prosecutor has already opened an investigation, and what's really important now is the gathering of evidence to make sure that the most powerful case can be brought whenever it can be brought.
Sir Keir Starmer there. Russian troops are advancing on the city of Mykolaiv near the Black Sea between Odessa and Kherson. That's according to its mayor. A Ukrainian presidential advisor, though, says they've managed to drive the troops back. Meanwhile, authorities in Mariupol, also in the south, say it remains under constant attack and residential areas are being shelled. In the capital, Kyiv, residents and volunteers are creating metal anti-tank barriers known as hedgehogs in a bid to slow Russia's advances. Yulia Gritsenko, one of many forced to flee the capital, says Ukrainians are fighting for Europe's future.
I'm really proud of all my people, of all Ukrainians who are now fighting for our freedom, for our right to live in a democratic country, to protect Europe from, from the global war which is happening right now in my country. And I just hope that my child will grow up here in Ukraine and we will be free from Russia.
Well, the Home Secretary is visiting Poland later to meet Ukrainians seeking to flee to the UK. Priti Patel's expected to launch the Ukraine Family Scheme, allowing Brits and those settled in the UK to bring their relatives over to join them. In other news, Paulette Hamilton has won the Birmingham Erdington by-election, holding the Labour seat. A nurse of 25 years, Miss Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency. In her victory speech, she expressed her admiration for the work done by her predecessor, Jack Dromey, who died in January. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the briefing with Isabel Oakeshott.
Coming up this hour on the briefing, this is day 9 of the Russian assault against Ukraine. Yesterday, Kherson became the first major city to fall. We get the latest from a war reporter in Ukraine. Earlier, I sat down for a wide-ranging interview with the former MP Rory Stewart, where he expressed his concerns that Russia may use tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Don't miss that. And we'll discuss what kind of operations Russia could launch in Ukraine if forces continue to meet high levels of Ukrainian resistance. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Now, in 1 week alone, more than 1 million refugees have already poured out of Ukraine. More than half of those have gone to Poland, with others heading to Hungary, Moldova, Slovakia and neighbouring countries. It's time for all of us to realise that this is just the start. The European Union thinks up to 4 million people may try to leave and has said it will welcome them with open arms. Ukraine has a population of over 40 million, so in fact it could be a lot more. Boris Johnson has said that we in the UK could take 200,000 people. That's a good contribution. My question is, in the short term, and I do mean short term, could we do more? I think people in this country desperately want to help. They see people trying to escape Putin's crazed campaign to seize a sovereign nation. These people are fleeing for their lives as a madman destroys their country. And we in the UK have a proud history of generosity in these situations. In just a few short days, for example, a Daily Mail refugee appeal has raised an extraordinary £3 million. And I think people here want to play their part. Many people, myself included, have spare rooms they'd be willing to offer the most vulnerable people, mothers with young children, for example. And that would be on a temporary basis. But I do think efforts like this need to be properly organised. And this refugee crisis must not be allowed to spiral out of control, allowing millions of people to settle in the UK forever. Let's face it, ministers have an appalling record of keeping track of who comes and goes. This crisis has all the makings of yet another such fiasco. So let's get a well thought out, well managed and generous refugee welcome scheme up and running. But let's be very, very clear about the parameters. The government must get on top of this before, not after, hundreds of thousands of people seek asylum in the UK. I think we should take as many people as we can right now and let every one of us who is willing and able to help take part in that effort. But let's set ground rules. Let's be clear about how long the people we're helping are allowed to stay and what we as a country, who already have creaking public services and frankly an NHS on its knees, can realistically manage. So let's provide short-term visas with a presumption that when this awful conflict is over, those we've helped return to their own home country. And generally, I think most of them will want to do that. We must make sure they have the support they need to rebuild their lives. Yesterday, Russian President Vladimir Putin made it clear that the worst is yet to come as fighting in Ukraine continued for a 9th day. Russian forces have caused panic overnight after their shelling sparked a fire at Europe's largest nuclear power station. And that comes as Russian forces seized the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson yesterday. It's the first major city to fall so far. Joining me now to discuss this is a war correspondent, Nick Much. He is on the ground in Lviv in Ukraine. Thanks for joining us, Nick. If you can tell us broadly whereabouts you are in the country and what is going on in that area.
So I've been around the country, including in Kiev and further west. But right now, I'm currently in Lviv, which is it's probably the safest city. It's near the Polish border, and it's currently the center of the refugee crisis that you were talking exactly about. But there's quite a lot of very sad scenes here at the moment. You know, we're talking families separated. We're talking people queuing for and walking for up to 30 or 40 kilometers, desperately trying to get to the border to get to safety. Now, while Lviv remains safe for now, we do not know what the future will bring. For instance, I've seen a lot of military preparations here over the last few days, and everybody is worried that this might get suddenly much, much worse.
Right. And in terms of any kind of military build-up, you said you've seen a lot of preparations. Is that on the Ukrainian side defensive, or is there a sense of the area that you're in being in some way next up on a target list?
So one of the worries that we really do have is that there have been a lot of Belarusian troops seen on the border just to the north of Lviv. Now, yes, we see a lot of defensive operations going on. And it's mainly the sort of things like bringing more troops into the city, sandbagging up buildings and their windows, putting, as you were saying, the Czech Hedgehog anti-tank barriers on the way of all of the roads. However, I also, the other day, heard a half-dozen fighter jets flying overhead. Now, we don't know who or what they were, but they really did feel like an ominous sign of terrible things to come here. But for now, the area remains safe.
So that must have been a pretty unnerving, alarming experience for yourself and, of course, for all the residents there. Do you get the sense that the majority of people in Lviv are determined to stay put, or are you seeing a kind of mass exodus from the area and attempts to get across borders?
So it's a little bit of both. There are a lot of Ukrainians here that have come from other parts of the country. I mean, yes, they say 1 million people have crossed the borders, but the crisis of internally displaced people is much greater. So, for instance, hostels, hotels have all mainly been turned into shelters. But that said, a lot of people are really willing to stay and fight here. I remember I saw one really tragic scene on the border yesterday. I interviewed a woman named Lydia who had just gone to the border to bring her 2 daughters across to Poland. Her 3 sons had all gone to Kiev to fight in the front line of the defense there. These are the kind of things that people are going through right now.
And in terms of everyday life, such as it is on the streets, you know, you said that a lot of places are being converted into shelters. Are shops open? I mean, to what extent is there a kind of surreal normality operating alongside this terrible sense of impending attack?
So most things are normal. Shops, about half are shut, about half are open. Everything closes quite early. There's a 10 p.m. curfew. You know, the sale of all alcohol has been banned, and a lot of the men specifically are kind of being enlisted into the volunteer territorial forces. Every day you see more and more troops on the street. When I arrived here about 3 or 4 days ago, that wasn't the case. So every day it moves further and further away from that kind of normality. That said, life still does go on to some extent. You know, you can still see people in bars and restaurants. A lot of people say that the crisis they don't feel has quite hit them yet, and that they feel as if they're watching a film in the rest of the country.
And in terms of the morale of the local population, obviously it's very difficult this end to separate propaganda. You know, what are the Russians putting out there? What's propaganda that we're receiving this end? Is there a sense amongst the population there that there is still hope that they can defeat overwhelming military superiority on the Russian side? Or is there a sense of a kind of dark inevitability that this country is going to be taken over and broken up by the Russian president?
So I have to say the vast majority of Ukrainian people I've met are very determined. So, for instance, I will go back to what you were saying in your opinion about the refugee crisis, about people wanting to return. I dropped one of my best friends here off at the train station to make her way to Poland today. And I said, you know, when I'm done here, I'll see you in Warsaw. And she said, no, you will see me in Kiev, in a free Ukraine. And that's the kind of the sense that people have, that they really will give everything they can. People here feel that they are fighting not just for their lives, but for their entire nation, for their entire country. Now, there are some people who have a defeatist attitude. Not that they're necessarily wrong, because there is overwhelming military superiority on the Russian side. But so far, that military superiority hasn't turned into the gains that we think Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin expected. And the longer this conflict drags out, the more international pressure will rain down on Russia, the more the sanctions will bite to start to take effect, the more there will be domestic political discontent within Russia. I think there is a sense that if Ukraine can hold out long enough, there will be some kind of issue that will stop Vladimir Putin in his tracks. Could that be wishful thinking? I suspect so, but it certainly can't be ruled out.
Nick March in Lviv, thank you very much for your report. Now, coming up next, it's an exclusive interview with former Cabinet Minister Rory Stewart, so don't miss that. But before that, a short break.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
In the latest worrying development in Ukraine today, Russian forces have seized control of Europe's largest nuclear plant following an attack that critics have labelled horrific and reckless. The Ukrainian president has said it could have caused 6 Chernobyls. So how much further will President Putin go? Earlier today, I spoke to Rory Stewart, the former Secretary of State for International Development and an expert in foreign affairs, about the UK's response to the conflict and what might yet happen. I asked first how tough he thought the West's response had been.
It's been tougher than I expected. It's been better than I expected, but it's still not good enough. Better than I expected because, in fact, Germany has been the real surprise here. It's really stepped up. It's extraordinary. The new German Chancellor, who comes from a left-wing party and who's spent nearly 30 years, that party, basically being an almost pacifist party, has committed an extra 100 billion to defence, which is more than twice the size of the UK defence budget, and has said it's going to be spending more than 2% on defence. That's a huge change. And of course, the sanctions from Europe have been strong, and Biden has been surprisingly good, and Boris Johnson has made the right call, which is to back Ukraine and not compromise with Putin. But it's not enough because we need oil and gas sanctions.
And I think you've suggested that there should be a complete ban on Russian oil and gas exports. Is that right?
Exactly. At the moment, the one thing that Putin is betting on is that Britain, and in particular Germany and Italy, are going to continue to import Russian oil and gas. And that is really the thing that keeps this whole economy going. And his economy is in trouble. I mean, a lot of the measures that have been taken on SWIFT, on central banking, I think you might have seen those images, the fact that people can't even use their Apple Pay in the subway now on the metro in Moscow. All of that's having an impact, but the one thing that he believes nobody will ever do is stop taking his oil and gas, because that is worth, literally in a single day, he can get 300 million euro from that.
So how realistic is it to cut that off? You know, what would that look like here in the UK if we were to do that as part of an international effort, obviously?
Well, firstly, there would be an effect on energy prices, but more dramatically, there would be a big effect on the Italian and German economies, which would spill over to the British economy and indeed the global economy. But it's nothing compared to the cost of a European war. I mean, these big wars and having somebody like Putin raging around with tactical nuclear weapons available to him is unimaginable. And wars are very, very costly. The British economy lost nearly half its value during the Second World War. So yes, we would have to pay a bit more money for our energy. And governments like Italy and Germany would have to go into debt in order to cover the cost of supporting their energy. But it's definitely worth it. And it's the one thing that Putin is not expecting us to do.
Now, you mentioned about tactical nuclear weapons. You will have heard President Putin's alarmist language several days ago. Is that something you took seriously? Do you think that it is remotely realistic that he could push that button?
It's definitely possible. Russia, unlike countries like Britain, exercise and plan on the basis of using tactical nuclear weapons in a more conventional war. It's part of their armory, and they move them around when they move their troops around. Now, they haven't yet deployed them, and I think the thing that hopefully will stop them deploying them is just the sense that Ukraine is so close to Russia, so intimate with Russia. I mean, these analogies are terrible, and we shouldn't draw these kind of parallels, but it is like, almost feels, and this is one of the reasons Putin's invading, it feels to him close to Scotland, feels to England. Many, many Russians have relatives, many, many more have friends in Ukraine. And the idea of using tactical nuclear weapons on your closest neighbours, I think, hopefully will be something that will give even Putin pause for thought.
And what would that look like if he did take that very drastic step? Would that be a weapon that affected tens of thousands of people? Would the effects of that spill over into other countries?
No, I mean, it depends what he's doing. But some of these tactical nuclear weapons are called tactical because they have very limited impact and range. So it's not like dropping an atom bomb on Hiroshima. These are genuinely things that are designed to be used on the battlefield. The problem is the precedent that it causes, because of course nobody has used these things in war since the Second World War.
And nobody, fortunately, at the moment is talking about the use of chemical weapons, as we know has happened in Syria. Do you think that President Putin, frustrated by lack of progress, he's been ritually humiliated, might resort to that?
I think the key thing with Putin is to understand that we are not predicting him well. We don't understand him well. So anything that I say about him is speculation. He's a very different guy to the guy that was around 15 years ago. It's remarkable how much has changed. He seems much more lonely, much more isolated. He's probably making decisions which the Russian general staff do not approve of, and he's worrying them. But if you force me to guess, I would say that it's unlikely that he will do things like that. I think it's very unlikely that he will actually use tactical nuclear weapons. I think it's very unlikely he'll use chemical weapons. I think what is more likely to happen is that we will go into a phase of much heavier conflict. He'd hoped to be able to get through Ukraine quite quickly without killing many people. He'd hoped that he'd be able to topple Zelensky's government rapidly, and he was really relying on what he'd called hybrid warfare, which is cyber attacks, special forces, small light movements, which he thought could topple the country. Now that's failed. Now he's basically bogged down. The only option really remaining to him, or the next option to remain to him, is to grind his way through those cities in street-to-street combat, and that is brutal, really brutal.
How much of a grasp do you think the UK Prime Minister, our Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has on these events? Does he understand either the big picture or even the granular?
It's difficult to know. I was a Minister of State in the Foreign Office when he was the Foreign Secretary, and certainly in those days he didn't do detail. That wasn't his thing. And it was quite frustrating. I'd go into meetings and he'd say to me, Rory, we've got to sort out Libya. Libya is a bite-sized British problem. And I'd go in and say, but Foreign Secretary, we don't actually have an ambassador in Libya at the moment. The ambassador's in Tunisia, and this is what the budget would be, and this and the other, and he'd lose interest. I think in this case, though, he's got the main point, which is that he has clearly come out and said Putin is an aggressive bully. He's clearly identified that Zelensky in this conflict is the good guy, in simple terms. And
sounds pretty basic at this point.
And that we shouldn't be appeasing somebody who's invading another person's country. So I think he's got the right judgment. I think it's extremely unlikely that he's going to be following the in and out details of what's happening on the front lines or has particular views on that stuff.
And what about the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss? You've said that she doesn't really or never used to have any interest in foreign affairs. Do you think she's on top of this?
So Liz Truss is bright, hardworking, and will be getting into this stuff and taking clear lines. It's definitely true. When I began in politics, this was not her bag at all. And I remember very, very clearly when I was getting on the Foreign Affairs Committee and running to be chairman of the Defence Committee that she wanted to stay as far away from that stuff as she possibly could. Her real interest in those days was education. But there's no doubt she's a bright, determined figure with firm views.
And looking at bigger picture, what about the state of the Foreign Office here? How well equipped is it to manage a crisis like this? Obviously, we've got the MOD suffered huge cuts. Nonetheless, Ben Wallace seems to be providing very strong leadership, many would say. What about the Foreign Office? Is it so depleted that it can't really cope with a crisis like this?
Well, I think it's very depressing what's happened right across British defence and foreign policy. You're right, Ben Wallace has done a good job, and he seems to be really coming into his own. But the truth of the matter is that we have eviscerated our military and our foreign service, not just over the last 10 years, but over the last 30 years. So all the capacity that we really had militarily to deal with land war in Europe has been run down. Tanks have been got rid of, things like heavy bridging capacity has been abolished, and people got obsessed since the time of David Cameron with the idea that everything was about a tilt towards Asia and China. Huge investment went into completely unnecessary aircraft carriers, fantasies about the British Navy, and we totally took our eye off the ball of conventional land warfare. So that's one big problem. The second problem, as you say, is the Foreign Office itself. It's very sadly, no government seems to be prepared to say that we need a decent Foreign Office and that we need to spend money on it, because the story in the Daily Mail is always ambassadors quaffing champagne in residences. Nobody wants to increase their budget. But the truth is the French spend nearly twice as much on their foreign service as we do. And if we're serious about global Britain, we need diplomats who speak other people's language as well, who spend a long time there and have people on the ground.
So we're a bit tight on time, but I wanted to ask you to what extent you think what's happening now is our own fault due to a lack of strategic vision and weakness over the past decade?
I think it's certainly the fault of the West cumulatively. So it's the fault of the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe, in our very, very bad response to Crimea, our very, very weak and uncertain response around red lines on Syria, and the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan, all of which convinced Putin that the West was in decline. He talks about this a lot very openly, that he wasn't going to face any opposition and that he had an opportunity to do something quite as horrific as invade another country in this way for the first time since the Second World War. And that shows nearly 15 years of pusillanimity and weakness and lack of conviction from the West.
And do you see any hope, and this is a really big picture question, do you see any hope for Britain's declining place in the world? Some would say that actually the UK has stepped up in a relatively impressive way over this crisis. Do you think that marks any kind of hope of a revival of us actually punching above our weight?
I agree with you that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have made the fundamental right call on Ukraine and Russia, and they did it quickly and they did it clearly. But to really rebuild our international position, we have to invest in institutions and people. It's not about one or two politicians making a speech. It's about having a good military, a good foreign service, a strong intelligence service. And we've run all those things terribly, terribly down, partly because politicians are not interested in talking about civil service reform, partly because the public doesn't want to spend more money on those kinds of things. But if Britain really wants to do those things, I sometimes wonder whether Britain does. I sometimes wonder whether actually Britain pretends that it cares about global Britain, likes waving the flag and going, yeah, but doesn't actually want to spend any money on it and doesn't really want to think about the difficult questions and compromises and diplomacy that's involved in really exercising influence in the world. But if we did want to do it, we certainly could. We are, as we keep saying, the fifth largest economy in the world. But the truth is, that the French, who have a smaller economy than us, have a much, much more impressive international machine.
I mean, for example, I remember you telling me years ago that there weren't enough people who spoke the relevant languages during the conflict in Afghanistan within the Foreign Office and the Department for International Affairs. Do we have enough Russian speakers, for example, in the Foreign Office?
No, I mean, the whole thing is pathetic. I mean, when Putin invaded Crimea in 2014, it turned out we didn't have a Crimea desk officer in the Defense Intelligence Department. We were scrabbling to move people across from other parts of Central Asia. I mean, we simply haven't got the coverage in the political intelligence. It's actually difficult for us to perform our role as a permanent member of the UN Security Council because we're talking, for example, all the time about Africa and countries where we don't have embassies and where we don't really have any information. We're bluffing. The British are in the position of bluffing. And I know we have a prime minister who bluffs, but we don't need a whole system who bluffs.
OK, Rory Stewart, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, coming up next on the briefing, we'll be speaking to a modern warfare expert on the tactics Putin may resort to in Ukraine. But first, it's your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thanks, Isabel. It's 12:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Vladimir Putin has warned those opposing Russia's actions in Ukraine not to exacerbate the situation. That, as Boris Johnson calls Moscow's shelling of a nuclear power station a direct threat to the safety of all of Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant in Ukraine, the largest in Europe, caught fire overnight and has been seized by Russian forces. Boris Johnson's vowed to seek an emergency UN Security Council meeting in a bid for a ceasefire. The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine amid an intense day of diplomacy in Europe. Liz Truss is attending a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. Speaking in Denmark earlier, UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says Russia's playing with fire.
Russian armed forces has in its arsenal a whole range of horrors that go way beyond capabilities that we would choose to have if you're complying with Geneva Conventions, the thermobaric vacuum bombs, for example, that we see in their inventory, in the way they are used, the cluster munitions that many of our countries have banned, those are weapons they still use. And the worrying signs from President Putin is, in his words, he seems to indicate no limit.
Defence Secretary Ben Wallace there. Meanwhile, the Home Secretary has arrived in Poland to meet Ukrainians seeking to flee to the UK. She's there to launch the Ukraine Family Scheme, which allows anyone settled in the UK to bring their Ukrainian family to safety. Ms Patel says the British government's doing everything it can to support the Ukrainian people as they fight for freedom. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. It's back to the briefing with Isabel Oakeshott in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, earlier in the programme, we heard Rory Stewart talking about the prospect of brutal street-to-street fighting in Ukraine. Major John Spencer is one of the world's leading experts on this type of warfare. He's the chair of Urban Warfare Studies at the Madison Policy Forum think tank and has also chaired the Urban Warfare Studies at the Modern Warfare Institute at West Point. And he's a veteran, having served in Iraq, where he led the security of 3 Iraqi towns, so incredibly experienced in this area. The population of Kyiv is 2.8 million, and according to the World Bank, almost 70% of Ukraine's population does live in towns and cities. So far, Kherson is the only major city in Ukraine to have been taken by the Russians. Ground troops have mainly been confined to the roads, and there's been very little urban warfare at this point. That is all very likely to change. Good morning, Major Spencer, and thank you very much for getting up early to talk to GB News. Events are moving very fast, and we know that Mariupol in the south is surrounded and Kharkiv is under heavy bombardment. It's one thing taking these cities, extremely challenging though it's proved, but what about holding them? How many Russian troops do you think will be actually required to hold Ukraine if it means occupying these cities?
Good morning, Isabel. In my opinion, and based on my own research, if they were to hold these areas, God forbid that Kyiv falls and this enters the second phase, which would be, in my opinion, a very robust insurgency, as Ukrainians have already said, they're going to resist forever. They would need hundreds of thousands. I mean, the classic counterinsurgency numbers, even the coalition never achieved those numbers in Iraq. And that wasn't, that was like 1% of the population that was a part of the insurgency. This would be horrific for the Russian military, and they would not be able to hold a lot of these or just face opposition every day.
I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy for those in Ukraine to say that they're going to stay and fight. Of course, it's a terrifying situation for them. But once we start seeing heavier bombardment, do you think that determination on the part of the population to fight back will dissipate? Or do you think that there's something unique going on here that we haven't seen in any recent conflict?
No, I think that overall feeling is valid. I did not think, to be honest, that the reason that the Russian plan, they attempted like an Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, shock and all, rapid seizure of urban areas failed was the resistance. Now, yes, unfortunately, the Russians fear urban warfare. They're not going to send troops in until after they've bombed everything. For a lot more than they already have. And it's already horrific scenes of civilian infrastructure. And that will break people. I don't think it'll break them all, though. And it is, I had to go pretty back in history, pretty far back, where this many people will resist after continued military power like this.
That's very interesting what you say, that the Russian troops fear urban warfare. Is that because of a lack of experience in it? I mean, they have, of course, had extensive experience in Syria, but perhaps not a parallel.
So, yeah, all soldiers, to be honest, even my time, I jumped in an invasion of Iraq, and I went back in 2008 for the Battle of Sadr City in Baghdad. All soldiers fear urban combat. It is the hardest place ever to ask a soldier to fight in. And there could be a sniper in any window, the ambushes, you can't deploy your forces. I mean, it's called the Great Equalizer because it really neutralizes all their capabilities. And I don't think the Russians have they definitely don't have experience in this type of urban warfare, even in Syria. And Russia's showing that they're not the great military that we thought they were. Yeah, they're big, but look how inept they've shown even getting to the urban areas to fight, which is the goal is to take Kiev. If Kiev can hold, Ukraine lives.
And you've described turning cities into porcupines. What does that mean? And what are we likely to see Ukrainians doing? I was very interested by that expression, which I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, sure. There's lots of historical examples where just a few fighters dug deep into urban terrain have resisted great military power. I mean, just look at the Battle of Mosul in 2016. I mean, the ISIS fighters were like 5,000, maximum 12,000 untrained terrorists. And it took over 100,000 Iraqi security forces backed by the most powerful coalition air power in the world, 9 months to get them. So turning a city into a porcupine means turning every street into a barricaded path, which is historic, to make it so hard for any military to come in any road. That's what they do. They want to penetrate deep into Kiev and raise their flag. They don't have to clear it all. But I think they should be barricading, preparing which buildings to fight from. But this is very dangerous, very dangerous. As we can see, even from yesterday, how dangerous this is for anybody who's resisting. So they have to be very smart. Seek the underground, seek basements, and wait and continue to resist.
And what is your take on what is going on with that Russian convoy in the north? Are they stuck in the mud? Are they basically bogged down for some reason, or is this a strategic pause?
Yeah, so there's multiple reasons, and only they know the exact reason. But we know from the UK and the U.S. intelligence updates that they're running out of gas. They've run out of gas. They've had vehicle breakdowns. They're forced to that road because the mud is not an option. They can't come off that road. So if you have a bunch of breakdowns, and when you're in a file like that, then that's going to cause you to bog down. And they may be having problems logistically getting to them. I mean, we have a saying within the military that amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. They have to be able to supply that force, but they need that convoy to take Kiev, to surround it, to penetrate it. That's all what they need. But I mean, it's a dangerous thing. But I'm glad it's stalled. Every hour, every day, they give the Ukrainians time to prepare to resist, especially in the urban areas, is great for us.
Thank you. Now, we're a little bit tight on time now, but I think a lot of people are wondering why we've not yet seen the full scale of Russian air superiority. Why has there been a kind of lag in that happening, and when do you think that will kick off?
Yeah, because from day one, they failed to achieve air supremacy and air superiority, different terms, to own the sky. It's still contested on the ground, and that's great that all countries are sending those vital things like Stingers that can take down air. So they're scared. It's dangerous up there for them. Not to say that it's not extremely dangerous for the people on the ground that those air can fly, but it's still contested airspace, which is exactly what has to continue for Ukraine to survive.
Major John Spencer, thank you so much for joining us, a real expert in urban warfare. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the shocking images coming out of Ukraine are painfully familiar to the people of Syria, who know only too well what it's like to be on the receiving end of Putin's bombardments. When the bombs rain down and all the infrastructure is destroyed, who pulls people out of the rubble? Who separates the living from the dead and provides life-saving treatment to survivors? Well, in Syria, it's the White Helmets, otherwise known as Syria's Civil Defence Force. These amazingly brave volunteers rush into the danger zone when the bombs fall. And we are very fortunate to be joined by one of their team, Ismail Al-Abdullah, for his perspective on what this kind of conflict looks like. Now, he is in Idlib in Syria, which is still a scene of heavy fighting. Thank you so much for joining us. How do you feel seeing the images coming out of Ukraine?
For all the Syrians and specific the white helmets who responded to thousands of attacks, deadly attacks of Russia.
Can't hear him.
I feel pain. We feel pain that people now in Ukraine feeling and enduring this kind of killing, this kind of weapons. We feel as the human beings, we sympathize with him. We send our thoughts and our hearts are with them, because they will facing now aggression, the Russian aggression. They will be, thousands of them will be killed as Syrians. Now thousands of people died since the Russian intervention in Syria, 2015, September 2015, up to now. Thousands of children died. My volunteers, majority of our volunteers who were killed by Russia, by the double tap, by this, it's a strategy in killing civilians and killing people who are rushing to save the others. So as Syrian, as one of the white helmets, the images that come from Russia shocked me, and from the very beginning, I was one of those people who showed solidarity with them, that we need to be beside them. We need to stand with them in this tough circumstances. We wish them the peace and safety.
And is there any equivalent of the white helmets in Ukraine? Is there any other kind of volunteer force like yourselves there?
For the white helmets, the situation was different, because when we established the white helmets, there was a gap because the regime withdrew from our regions. So, but in Ukraine, we still government, and they providing the ambulance and rescue and search. But if not, if they, and I would say as white helmets and volunteers and Syrian people, from our experience, it should be, and have to be guys who like us do the search and rescue to save the people, to give the people a second chance to live from under the rubble of Russia, from the deadly attacks from Russia, will be destructive, and so we hope that there are guys, NGOs like us, to give the people of Ukraine second chance to live.
Now, in Ukraine, very concerningly, there's evidence, I think, of the use of cluster bombs. Did you have experience of that in Syria, and what are the consequences of the use of those deplorable types of weapon?
This type of weapons, cluster bombs, its danger lasts for years. It's when they use this kind of weapons, bombs, they intend to displace the people, because when those bombs scattered on the ground, farmlands, civilians, neighborhoods, its danger lasts for years. So it's very dangerous for them when they use this kind of weapons. The aim of using this kind of weapon is to kill more people for a long time, to make them to displace the cities, to make the people flee, because when these bombs didn't explode in the first place, they will explode in the future. Many children, many civilians will think this kind of weapon just toys or something they can play with. Specific the children, that we have a big experience in this. We lost a lot of kids in this by this kind of weapons. So it's very dangerous. Russia using it because they want this place and make the cities empty to kill more people for the moment and the future.
Extremely concerning, the use of these types of weapons, and equally reports of thermobaric weapons, which have horrible effects, I understand, on their victims.
Yeah, it's very dangerous for the lives of the victims, because the wave and the pressure, when the vacuum rockets, if you can say, when they explode, the people who are around the site of the bombing will be killed because of the pressure and the fuel. If they will expose that the fuel, if they didn't explode, they will be burnt. They will be burnt and severely, and more than anyone you think. So, and then after maybe a lot of more civilians will inhale toxic. So this is very dangerous, very, very dangerous, if you can say, kind of weapon. And it's banned weapon in the first place, so it's very difficult to handle. It's very to avoid this kind of weapon. They use it to kill people, and more people in one rocket maybe will kill a whole neighborhood, maybe because of the pressure and the huge explosion of the weapon.
And just very briefly, where you are now, Idlib, a very notorious place of some dreadful fighting. Is it quite stable? It looks like where you're doing this interview kindly for us now is perfectly safe. Very briefly, what's the situation there for you now in Syria?
The situation now, not like before 2 years ago, after reaching the agreement with Turkey, the situation has somehow stable, but Russia still bombing. And bombing northwest Syria. Recently, two men were killed by Russian artillery bombing on the countryside of Idlib. We're losing every day people and children from the war remains of Russian bombing on northwest Syria. It's not the bombing is not intensified like before. It's not intense, but the situation still, people living in danger and afraid of any further advance on the ground. We hope that this agreement will hold more, and to the people live in peace here, as we wish for the Ukrainian people.
Thank you so much, Ismail Al-Abdullah from the White Helmets in Syria. Thank you. Now, as hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians flee their country, Poland is facing a humanitarian crisis. As we've been discussing, more than 500,000 refugees have already poured across the border and will now need to be looked after. I'm joined by Daniel Kaczynski, the Conservative MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham. Daniel was born in Warsaw to Polish parents and has naturally been taking a very close interest in what's going on. Daniel, thanks for joining us. We do have a slightly dodgy line here, but we're going to give it a try. I'm very interested to hear from you what you think of the situation in Poland and how long they're going to be able to absorb these enormous numbers of refugees for.
Well, if you can hear me, obviously very, very proud of the way in which the Polish nation has responded to this crisis in neighbouring Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian families have been taken into homes by Polish neighbours and friends, looked after, people trying to find them jobs and making sure they feel safe and welcome in Poland. It's absolutely tremendous, the response they've had. What worries me a little bit is that some people here in the House of Commons have been demanding that the United Kingdom bring in more Ukrainian refugees into the United Kingdom. Of course, we have to play our part, helping to resettle potentially millions of people who will be fleeing Ukraine. But the most important thing is keep as many Ukrainians as possible in safety within the region. In countries like Poland, Slovakia, Hungary and Romania. What Putin is trying to do is trying to deliberately target civilian areas in order to frighten people away from Ukraine and to ethnically cleanse this country and then ultimately to Russify it. And he should not be allowed to do that. And I very much hope that when this war is over, as many Ukrainians as possible can return to the country. They can start to build and continue to fight against Russia.
I'm sorry that the line is so bad, and I really hope that we'll come back to you on this story, as I know you're going to be following very closely what's going on the Polish border. You've been watching the briefing with me, Isabel Oakeshott, thanks to Daniel Kaczynski there, and the show is back every Friday from noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan, but for now, I'll leave you with your weather forecast.
Hello. Big contrasts with the weather this Friday. A fairly dull, dismal day across much of the east, whereas in the west, well, there are one or two showers, but many places dry and bright with some spring sunshine, thanks to this little ridge of high pressure. This weather front, though, has been with us for a few days now, and it's just ground to a halt across these eastern parts of England, bringing thick cloud, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the day. Parts of eastern Scotland also being affected. Parts of East Anglia still largely dry, and we could reach double figures in Norwich with a bit of brightness, but stuck under this rain band from Newcastle to Hull. Temperatures really only 5, 6, 7 at best. Further west, a few showers for Wales and southwest England, but many places dry and bright, and temperatures 8, 9, 10 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll keep a few showers in the west, and we'll keep that wet weather across the east, although it should start to peter out across the far northeast of England. Staying fairly soggy, though, across East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and rain on and off across southeast England and East Anglia for most of the night. Keeping the temperatures up here, but with clearer skies further west, a frost likely, certainly for Scotland, Northern Ireland, a fairly widespread frost to start the weekend, but should be some cracking sunshine here on Saturday. Now, yesterday we thought this rain may be a little further north, but now it looks like it will be mostly across these eastern parts of England, south of Lincolnshire into the East Midlands. A dull, damp day here on Saturday. Brighter skies for Wales and southwest England, some sunshine likely here, and as I said, a fine day for Scotland and Northern Ireland after that early